because you have to type it in when we're recording. So just wait until Emma instructs you to do so. Okay.
You can go ahead, type your name and your teacher and your class section that you're in, if you know it, and that will ensure that you get your extra credit if you're here for extra credit. Well, other than that, first things first, welcome to the first History and Political Science lecture of the semester. My name is Emma. I'm the president of this club. This is our second semester doing it in a virtual format, and it went really smoothly last semester. So here we are doing it again. I want to introduce you to Chris Dominique. He is our new vice president. I'm very, very, very thankful to have him around to help. This is my last semester in the program, so all the help is just so needed. And then also Dr. Cavell is our faculty sponsor, and she we wouldn't be here without her. So thank you to you guys. Dr. Cavell already went through the Phi Alpha Theta stuff, but I'll just say it again. We are the Phi Alpha Theta. It's the History Honor Society, and they are accepting new members right now. You don't need to be a history major to be in the History Honor Society. If you like history and you want to be in an honor society, you can join. All you need is a 3.6 GPA in your history courses and a 3.0 overall. And if you're interested in joining, you can either email me at emma.foster@sclu.edu, or you can email Dr. Cavell. Either of us can get you where you need to be in order to join. Today, our guest speaker is Dr. Traver. You may or may not know him from campus. He's one of our professors here in the history department. He has a very fascinating topic to talk about today. I'm so excited for this one. I already started recording the lecture, so if you know anyone who wanted to see it, just get in touch with me and I can send you a copy. But we're like I already said, drop your name in the chat if you need to be counted for extra credit. I think that's everything. I'll go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Traver now. So make sure your microphones are on mute and everything, so that this can go quietly and smoothly, and we can all hear what he has to say.
Thank you very much, Emma. Let me go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint. I'd like to say that this project got started, I think it was fall 2016, but it was a directed study that I did with an undergraduate student. And she's a student who had a career, then went to school, then left to add another career. And she came back, and she needed a history elective. So we agreed to do a directed readings course on medieval demonology. And it's an area, I knew a little bit about the late medieval tradition, but she was specifically interested in the early modern tradition, going into the Renaissance. And it was something which I knew about vaguely, mainly witches and stuff, the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer Against Witches, which was published in the 15th century and is part of this great witch craze. But what we did is we arranged a readings list where it was a combination of primary and secondary sources to try to put the whole, medieval demons in the medieval world and the role of the exorcist into kind of a coherent whole. And so we started doing that. And then all of a sudden, she asked me how much I charged an hour to translate Latin. And, I looked at her, and then she comes forward with this. And this is the Malleus daemonum. This is the demon hammer, or the hammer against demons. And it's a work that was first published in 1620 and then later published again in 1624. So it was published twice. But it was reprinted by the Vatican in 2012. And it wasn't really reprinted, it was scanned. So somebody scanned it and then, sold it. And so she had it, and she was interested in it. In particular, it's a series of exorcisms. And what it is, it's a collection of 5 exorcisms. And she was interested in the Hammer Against Demons because of the exorcisms, but in particular, she was interested in the material that preceded the exorcisms. And this is what we have. They are epigrams. And I will go ahead and show you from a picture of it. So they're epigrams. And the way Alessandro Albertini has designed the book is that we have a series of exorcisms that are very biblically based. So we have exorcisms on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then at the end, we have a vernacular or an Italian series of exorcisms on John. Okay, so the text is primarily Latin, except at the end. Now, these epigrams are prefatory matter, and unfortunately, they're the first thing she showed me. And so there are 3 epigrams before Matthew. And so we had these poems, these Latin poems. There's 3 for Matthew, there's 1 for Mark, there's 1 for Luke, there's 1 for John, and there's not 1 in the vernacular exorcism. So she showed it to me. She said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think this is really hard," because it is. These are elegiac couplets. And this is from Greek poetry, which of course the Romans used, so it went into Latin poetry. They're used by some bards and minstrels in the medieval period, but they kind of die out until the Renaissance. And there's this revival during the Renaissance when people look back to classical norms. And they're complicated because what they are is they consist of lines where you have an alternating long and a short sound. So the first sentence, you have a long sound, second sentence, short sound. Well, that doesn't sound too hard. But the way it works is in Latin, you don't need to conjugate the verb or decline the noun, as it were. What you do is when you're reading, you determine whether the sound is going to be large or long or short, and then you supply the ending, as it were. And to make things worse, remember, I'm working from a scan, and so all the S's turned into F's and the U's and N's, and I mean, so it was really problematic. And so I fought with it for a while, and I said, I don't really want to do this. So I went through one epigram, and essentially what you have is the power of the hammer of the demons against all the weapons of the pagan gods and goddesses and monsters. And the students saw, Jupiter and Saturn and Athena and Tenarius and all the pagan deities. And she was particularly interested in the survival of pagan belief into the Renaissance period. So that's why she wanted this translated first. And so I looked at it and said, well, and I struggled with it for a while. I said, look, this really is problematic. And we were able to get a hold of a copy of the 1624 version, which helped enormously, because what we could do is we could use the 1624 version to read against the 1620 scan, because there were so many typographic errors in the scan. And they're not necessarily publishing errors. They're just errors when you scan something, it doesn't scan perfectly. And so we had the 1624 edition. And so we kind of used that as a corrector, which made things a little bit easier. And then you can see, this is the first epigram on Matthew. And we have all of this very ornate pagan imagery. And this is hyper classical. This is somebody with an excellent Renaissance education, because a lot of the things, you have to look up, like sulfuric was Pythagorean, and it refers to an area between Naples and Puteoli that is known for having sulfur. So using very, very detailed classical allusions. I don't think Alessandro Albertino wrote these epigrams, because the Latin, I think, is above his pay grade, because I mean, it's so dense and so complicated. But this is the preparatory matter that we do have to the actual exorcisms. We have the epigrams on Matthew. There's 3. There's the first one, and it's the longest. And then essentially you have all of the weapons of the pagan gods. You've got lightning, Jove, you've got the shield, you've got a mace, you've got different defenses, you've got Neptune's trident. Should I not say which one is greater? And so your hammer, that is your hammer, which you can see earlier Vulcan made, but you've got your hammer, and your hammer is going to fight against these demons. And then we have more epigrams. So this is the second set. And so they have to deal with Medea. The witch Medea is said to have been able, with her incantations, to bring forth savage monsters from the lake of hell. Do you marvel? Do you wonder at such power? Don't. Power is greater in words, which this book teaches. And then it goes through and it compares, Medea's incantations and the power of the book. And so we have all of these classical allusions in all of the epigrams. So first the 3 before Matthew and the 1 each. And what I've done is I just showed you on Luke, because they get shorter as time progresses. So against hell, Luke, do you take up arms? A cohort engage in close combat with the savage enemy. Satan will flee, for he takes flight from the frequent blows. And so you're using the Malleus, or the hammer of demons, to fight Satan and the demons. So essentially, that's what's going on with the epigrams. But it was very complicated. It was my first introduction. And so I said, okay, let me look at that. Okay, no, let's go back and let's look at the introduction. I said, we need to look to see exactly what he's doing and how these epigrams fit in. And so that's what I did, is I went back and I said, this is something which I think is publishable because obviously there's a need for it. There's a niche. It's not available in English anywhere. It's only available in Latin. So at the very least, we can kind of fill in a gap by translating it into English and then coming up with an introduction and putting these sets of exorcisms within kind of the bigger picture. And so this is the Hammer Against Demons. And so originally written 1620, republished again in 1624 by parish priests. Rocca Contrada, the modern day Archivia, and this is Alessandro Albertini, who is a humble parish priest. Now, just kind of a general background, the why rather, and the how, and what's going on with demons. Well, of course, after the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity, in the early Middle Ages, this idea that demons could intervene, well, of course, it was seen as a pagan superstition, but it's found in different things, and it's found in the early Middle Ages. One of the best sources are the penitentials, which are books that list sins and the penances that you need to do. So they're kind of a training manual for priests in hearing confession. And so you hear if so-and-so admits to doing this, they need to do that. And so they really are kind of a good mine for popular religion and pagan practice and things which are still carried on. And of course, there's a lot of pagan things in there, which sometimes involve invoking demons, sometimes don't. One of my favorites is Burkhard of Worms in the 11th century has a penitential, and it states in there, well, he tells us, first of all, don't ever ask the penitent if they've done this. Rather, wait for them to tell you, because you might give them ideas. But he has one about a woman who strips herself naked and covers herself in honey and rolls around in the fields. And, if a penitent admits to having done this, they have 40 days in bread and water. Well, I mean, this obviously is some type of fertility ritual for the field, right? So this is evidence of some type of enduring paganism. So there is, paganism that we can see in the penitentials. And so this idea of, kind of intervening with these Olympic deities or whatever deities is found in the penitentials, but it's kind of dismissed as being pagan and not Christian. Now, and we always think about the role of the exorcist, and maybe we saw the movie, or we have all these ideas about what an exorcist is and what he does. Well, not to disappoint anybody, but in the early church, and actually the role of exorcist wasn't removed or eliminated until 1972, but the exorcist was a minor order. It's not a sacramental order. It's a very minor order. And the role of the exorcist in the beginning was to purify and to prepare catacombs. And so that is people who are preparing to become Christians. And so you're a part of the process of introducing them to Christianity, preparing them. And so, I don't want to disappoint anybody, but there's not demons everywhere. So that the exorcist simply had, a humble role in preparing people for baptism. Now, something happens in the later Middle Ages, and there's about a zillion different reasons why it happened, and I'll discuss some of the theories, and I'm not going to tell you which one is right because I don't know. There's a lot of different things going on. But what we know is that Thomas Aquinas has a series of disputed questions on evil, de malo, and these are disputed 1266 to 1267, and he has question 16 concerns demons. And where this comes from, we don't know. What we think is that this question was a separate disputation that after Aquinas died, his editors went ahead and threw it in with his other questions on evil. But there's a specific questions devoted to demons and how can demons influence us? What can they? So a whole series of scholastic things about what demons are and what they can do. And so these were later inserted into de malo. So this obviously made demons a trendy topic of scholarly thought. Aquinas, of course, talked about them. Well, there's also the issue of the revival of Roman law, beginning in the 11th century with the rediscovery of the Corpus Juris Civilis in northern Italy. So Justinian's old code was found. And of course, once people began to study and think about Roman law, there's a lot in there about black magic. And going back to the late Republic, black magic was seen as a real problem. And of course, it was treated with capital punishment, that somebody who, tried to curse or, do bad things would be guilty of capital punishment. Another factor that's not discussed so much is a lot of the imagery that we have in later exorcism manuals actually comes from Jewish grimoires, and these are collections of spells, and these are ancient, and so these circulated in various ways. The problem with it is they don't seem to have been very well organized until the Renaissance, and it's in the Renaissance period that often they're attributed to people like King Solomon, and so this circulated for thousands of years, which it didn't. But what it seems is this was part of a larger oral tradition. And so we know at Paris, for example, in the 13th century, that if theologians didn't understand how to interpret a Hebrew word in the Hebrew scriptures, they would, consult Jews. Well, it's likely that, if there were issues concerning spells or black magic, that Christians could have likewise consulted rabbis and other Jews who knew Hebrew in order to understand. Also, the 13th century is the century of the Inquisition. In 1241, it's created, and the Inquisition's job was to ferret out heresy. But of course, they discover a lot of other things. One thing they discovered is that a lot of Europe just really wasn't real Christian, or certainly didn't understand all the tenets of Catholic Christianity. So the role of the Inquisition and a lot of the things that they discovered had lots of folk magic things. And although some people say that Aquinas is responsible for it, other people say that it's actually people who didn't like Aquinas are responsible for this craze and demonology. And what we have in 1277 are a series of condemned propositions at Paris, first at Paris, then at Oxford. But at the University of Paris, 219 propositions are condemned. And they're all based on Aristotle, but they're aimed against Aquinas and others of Aquinas's ilk. And this idea that this happy Thomistic synthesis of reason and faith working in tandem and everything's great and it's a wonderful rational world, it kind of breaks down as people go after Thomas and what they see is his excessive use of Aristotle. And so they kind of cut at this Aristotelian naturalism that we see in Aquinas, and then open up what's been called pathways for a more fear-ridden world, which is more susceptible to demonology and, the role of demons. Okay, now the 14th century, most of you familiar with anything in Western Civ know that the 14th century wasn't a very happy one. That we have the Great Famine, we've got plague, we have a cooling period, we have schism in the church, we have the 100 Years' War, we have issues related to heresy, and so all of these things. And Pope Boniface VIII, who was a troublesome pope. And what we see kind of on an international scale, that sorcery and witchery and just general consorting with demons takes a center stage, because in 1303, the King of France, Philip IV, called the Pope, Boniface VIII, a sorcerer. So he had contact with evil spirits. And then continuing in this vein, 6 to 10 years later, there's an ongoing series of condemnations of the Order of the Knights Templar, and Philip's the prime mover. But they're accused of sorcery and black magic and 7 million other things. But the issue of sorcery really makes people think more and more about, demons and sorcery and, what's going on. And then in 1320, the second Avignon Pope, Pope John the 22nd, he is an effort to stem the perceived popularity of witchcraft. He orders the Inquisition to conduct sorcery trials. So inquisitors are no longer just looking for heretics, they're also looking for sorcerers. And so, again, the Inquisition has now a new role where it's trying to ferret out sorcerers. Now, a lot of this comes to a climax in 1486. And this is a publication of Heinrich Kramer's Malleus Maleficarum. And it's issued again in 1519 with Jakob Spranger, although we know very little of what Jakob did. But this, the Malleus Maleficarum is a hammer against witches. And it's issued by an inquisitor, Heinrich Kramer, and they're both Dominicans. And so what they'll do is the Dominicans have always had a large role in the Inquisition, all right? But what they're going to do is bring issues related to witchcraft into the forefront. And for Kramer, all sorcery and everything is essentially witchcraft. And so it primarily concerns witches. And there's a tripartite introduction, and this is going to come up again. But again, kind of a scholastic introduction. You discuss the real existence of witches and their collaboration with the devil. So witches really exist and they collaborate with the devil. What you do is you list the remedies, the precautions for those who attempt to confront these witches. And remember, the Inquisition's conducting sorcery trials, so these are things which inquisitors need to know. And it develops a methodology to hold proper witchcraft trials. It is what you need to know, what you need to ask, what you don't ask. And so it presents a scholastic introduction. And this is what you would expect to see in medieval and early modern exorcism manuals, that, you know, something like, what are demons? How do they affect us? Kind of like, well, we have the Aquinas de Mello on demons. But we have what is harmful magic. How do evil spirits affect us? When do you interrogate the accused? How do you interrogate? When do you do it? And how do you do it? But really, this helps. Already there had been this pan-European witch craze kind of congealing, but now it just explodes. And what happens, and this book, of course, we have the invention of the printing press in 1450. So it's printed and it's spread everywhere. And everyone gets excited about it, although not everybody really believes it. And it eventually will end up, once the index of prohibited books is created, it'll end up on the index. That's to most of these exorcism manuals. But essentially, Kramer tries to explain that every harm on humans, every harm on draft animals, every harm on crops, all bad weather, everything's caused by witches. So witches do everything bad, all harm on people, animals, crops, all harm, you know, that affects the weather, everything's caused by witches. And so even at the time, people are, no, not everything's caused by witches. So there is a little bit of disagreement. And it reminds me of the, I don't know if during quarantine, if you watch the Tiger King, but Carol Baskin, that's all Carol Baskin, or it's all Jewish space lasers, but everything's, you know, attributed to witches. And so witches do everything. So even after it's published, there is, you know, kind of this excitement about witches and this concern about witches, but also there's a little bit of skepticism that, well, you know, is everything related to witches? Now, what happens is in the 16th century, it's what we're going to have is a golden age of Franciscans in exorcism manuals. And the Franciscans will get involved. And this is interesting on lots of different levels because it's typically the Dominicans who are in charge of Inquisition and correct thinking. But the Franciscans are going to come into their own. Now, actually, it's a Franciscan Pope in 1585. And his bull, On Heaven and Earth, Caeli Itaere, called for an inquisitorial offensive against sorcery and witchcraft. The idea that sorcery and witchcraft are real problems, and this causes a great growth in the number of cases of demonic possession. And you can look at the time, 1585, this is also the period of the Counter-Reformation. Now, these witch trials and this witch craze isn't anything unique to Southern Catholic Europe. It also occurs throughout Protestant Europe as well. But we're looking primarily at Italy, so we're looking at a Catholic area. And there will be a lot of exorcism manuals that come out even before Caeli Itaere. And Girolamo Mengi's one, he is a 16th century, early 17th century observant Franciscan. And he's going to write 5 works on exorcism and demonology. So he kind of really sets the stage for Franciscan activities concerning demonology. And the first one is his Compendia dell'arte esoterica. And it's a tripartite manual in 3 books. So it's like the Malleus Maleficarum. So you look at the origins of demons, what they do, how they trap humans. The second book identifies people, especially women, okay, who engage in a pact with the devil. And this idea of a pact is important because it comes up in the early modern period where there's some type of pact or agreement. Either you enter willingly or unwillingly with a demon, but it's going to cause you to, use demonic powers to harm people. And the third book is devoted to remedies to counter the works, and it provides information for the priest/exorcist to liberate those who are possessed, obsessed, suffering from possession and other forms of demonic vexation. Okay. Then he continues. So this is kind of his Mengi's scholarly introduction. Then there's others. It's the Devil's Whip or the Devil's Scourge, Flagellum Daemonum in 1576. And there's 7 exorcisms. And people familiar with the literature probably know this work because it's been translated into modern English and translated into German as well. So it's, one of the early modern exorcism manuals that a lot of people turn to. But he continues. He's got the Club Against Demons, the Expulsion of Demons, the Flight of Demons. And so we have all these works about how to get rid of demons. So you can scourge them, you can club them, you can, force them to flee. Now, in 1614, Rome issues the Ritual Romanum. So it's the Roman ritual or the Roman rite. And this is kind of a post-Tridentine or post-Council of Trent way to counter, all of these manuals that, yes, we need to take an offensive, but wait, let's not go too far. And so what the Roman ritual does is it standardizes the practice and the procedures in the liturgy. And so this is what you need to do for an exorcism. But it isn't compulsory. That is, it allows for a lot of variation. And it's really not until the 18th century, so until the early 1700s, that Rome will really begin to crack down and say, no, this is wrong. Put it on the index of forbidden books. So although the Roman ritual is modified in 1614, we still have all of these private exorcism manuals circulating. And so exorcisms can be performed in lots of different ways in different areas. Okay, now concerning this one, Alessandro Albertino's Hammer Against Demons, it's an unusual work because he dedicates it to his bishop, and it's the Bishop of Verona. And where Rocca Contrada was, it's located near Ancona in kind of northeastern Italy. So it's kind of in the border of Verona, and then the Papal States. And, after the reorganization, after the Napoleonic Wars, it took place firmly in the Papal States. So it's kind of in that area. But he dedicates this book to his bishop, and he attests to his skill in expelling demons. And so he gives this introduction. And after I fought with the epigram, I went back and I looked at the introduction to see, okay, what does he have to? So essentially, he tells you how to prepare for an exorcism. And this portion's intended for priests. And so, of course, you have to, have confession and penance. Then you have to determine the status of the patient. And what Alessandro does is he gives us 4 categories: that the patient can be obsessed, oppressed, afflicted, or possessed, which is interesting because, there can be 2 or there can be 4, depending on the exorcism. There's got lots of different levels of possession. And one thing that's important, too, is also the translation, because generally maleficatus, I would translate as bewitched. And I've talked to other people who translate this type of material, and they said, stay away from that word, because in modern English, whenever we say bewitched, we assume there's a witch, right? And so this isn't necessarily a witch. It's somebody who's affected by demons. And so we agreed on we agreed on the team, the term ensorcelled, but we decided against it because we figured no one would know what it meant. So afflicted is fine. So these are the 4 categories, and you have to determine where the patient is. Are you obsessed, oppressed, afflicted, or possessed? And how do you do it? Well, Alessandro is not very good at this point. Modern exorcism manuals identify kind of 3 stages where you could be a victim of sorcery, it can be a sin-induced weakness, or you can be harassed by a demonic entity. But what Alessandro tells us is kind of disappointing, because he says, if you want to have the signs or the certainty of knowledge of the signs perfectly, search Testato and Book 8 of St. Matthew, question 214. And even from the same doctor, look at 25. Nor should you neglect to read Viadana, Polydorus, and Therese completely, since they render an account of all relevant matter both beautifully and clearly. For this reason, I'm not going to relate such material. What does this mean? I don't think he read any of that material. So I think he probably was trained in how to do exorcisms, and maybe somebody told him about the material. But generally, when you translate and you do types of work like this, you have to track down all the sources, and this is where he's getting it from. But the reality is, I don't think that he actually read this. I think somebody told him, and so he doesn't know, and he doesn't really tell us how to differentiate between the 4 different states. So we're going into the exorcism blind, as it were, because we don't know exactly what the patient is, if he or she's obsessed, oppressed, afflicted, or possessed. Now, and then there's procedure, and the procedure is always sign of the cross, and you make the sign of the cross constantly. Okay, there's little cross sigil everywhere in the exorcism. So, but sign of the cross, you need to give the patient holy water or blessed bread or blessed oil. You need to fumigate the patient or the victim with the blessed rue. And then he gives a time. It's best to begin after Mass, but the evening is also a good time to start an exorcism. And then he tells us the exorcist needs to be dressed in at least a stole. Well, I assume the exorcist needs clothes in addition to the stole. The stole is a liturgical garment, and the stole is going to be important because at various points the exorcist is going to take the stole off and hit the patient. Okay, but you have a stole, and everyone assisting has to stand around the patient in the shape of a cross. And then there's a series of prayers and litanies, and these prayers and litanies are repeated in the first 4 exorcisms. So we have the prayers and the litanies for Matthew, and then Mark, Luke, John. And then what he tells us is, okay, well, fine, exorcism manual. But this is what's interesting, and this is what's unique. He says, I've gathered here in complete progression the words of the passion of our Lord Jesus Christ, so that by their power the enemy might take flight. The words of Pilate, Ananias, Caiaphas, the crowds, and the Jews are announced, not for their strength or through their mouths, but so that the providence of God through the mouth of the holy evangelists and their styli may help us discern the truth of history. I looked at these words, I uttered these vain words repeatedly, and I used them as a guide for exorcism. So in a nutshell, the instruments to the Lord's passion are the most harmful to evil spirits, the words of Pilate, etc., amongst the instruments, and I intend to fight against the demons by using the words of Pilate and the instruments of the passions of Christ. Essentially, here's the strategy, that all of the bad words and all of the bad things that are done to Christ, Alessandro is going to take them and then use them against the demons, right? So there's always going to be parallelism. Christ is going to get hit, then you hit the demons, right? And so this is how you get the demons out of the body. So he's going to follow the passion narrative in all the Gospels very, very closely. And here's an example of early parallelism, is that this is Matthew 26, 15, 16. But they weighed out 30 silver pieces for him, and he thenceforth sought an opportunity to betray him. So this is Judas getting excited, you know, he's getting the 30 pieces of silver. And this is what you say to the demons. And in addition to those pains which you will always endure, I impose 30 more years of penalties if you do not lead this creature of God, ens nomen, the name, by both the merits and suffering of cross yourself, yet order you to depart from the body of this creature of God, name, depart damned and stubborn demons, right? So you always have a parallel complaint or threat to the demon. So the entire text will parallel what is occurring in the passion narrative. And there's more examples. Matthew 27:13. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear the great testimony they allege against you? And you, wicked ones, do you not hear the great testimony I have alleged against you, and that I'm going to allege against you to get you to leave? By the suffering of Christ, depart evil demons and rebels of God. So you take essentially the scriptural text and you turn it on its head, use it against the demons. So rather than it being used against Christ, you use it against the demons. In spitting upon him, they took the cane and beat him up on the head. And here in bold, you have a notice for the exorcist, and occasionally there are notes. And here, strike the stole on the head of the oppressed. So there's certain moments where you take the stole, the liturgical garment, and you take it off. You hit the head of the oppressed. And then you say, and I implore that the power of God the Father strike you and all of your heads to make you depart immediately from this creature of God. And I should mention heads. The demons are never singular. Or the demon is never singular. There's demons. They're always plural. And there's always lots of them. All right. And so a note here, the stole is the cane that flogged Christ. And so now it's flogging the demon. So there's all this parallelism everywhere, using the words and the instruments used against Christ, against the demons. So structure. And what Alessandro does is, first we have the introduction, then we have the epigrams, as we've seen. So we have these strange poems, and we have 3 for Matthew, and then 1 each for Mark, Luke, and John. And then we've got the litanies and the invocations of the saints. And these aren't super unusual. These are, fairly standard. There's certain ways that you invoke, and let's pull up and look at some of the invocations, because this is for John, but there's the same for all of them, that you start off and here's exorcism 4, we've got an epigram and the litany, Lord of mercy, and then you ask everyone to intercede. You want God the Father, God the Son, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity, Mary, all of the saints. You've got the male saints first, then you go down, then you've got the priests, the Levites, monks, and hermits, and you've got all the female saints, and then you want to be protected from all of these things, from a sudden unforeseen death and the oppression of demons. Deliver me, O Lord, and this your creature. Then you invoke Christ through your cross and passion, and then you get down to the prayer and the actual exorcism, and then the Vulgate text with the explanation, or with the punishment to the demon. Okay, so this is what you do. You use the scriptural text. And so after the litanies and the invocation of the saints, you make the sign of the cross repeatedly. Every time you see the cross, you make the sign of the cross. So the exorcist was doing this a lot. I conjure all you demons and order you that when you leave, you depart without harm to the soul and body of this creature of God. And this command works in all my exorcisms now and future ones, and will forever as I so strive. And what he tells us in the introduction is he tells us, Bishop, oh, I've used this all the time and it works great. And, one of the things that's always in the back of your mind is, well, who was he using it on? Or were there that many people who were possessed and Rocca Contrada? And so that a question. But there are 5 exorcisms, and all 5 very closely follow the Passion narrative. And so we've got Matthew, and essentially it's almost like a gloss or a commentary on Matthew 26-7, and then second exorcism is Mark 14-15, third exorcism Luke 23-24, fourth John 18-19, or 18-19, and then the fifth is John 18-19 too, but it's in Italian. And this is the 5th exorcism, and what he tells us at the beginning is that there's a 5th exorcism for the benefit of the unlettered and for women. That is, so people who don't know Latin and women who may not have access to a priest. And this may sound shocking, and it does in the secondary literature. It's mentioned several times. Well, this is what he does. Well, this isn't that shocking because, an exorcism is not a sacrament, but in times of emergency, lay people could administer sacraments. That if you're, traveling with your wife and she's about to give birth and you're in the middle of nowhere, well, you're allowed to baptize the baby. You just, when it's done, you're backing down, you need to check with the priest to make sure that you've done everything all right. So exorcisms are something that lay people can do if you don't have access to a priest. The other thing, the role of women, well, he kind of makes unlettered and women synonymous. And the 5th exorcism is a little bit tricky too, because he essentially repeats John, but the biblical text is still in Latin. So you've got Latin text and then Italian. This is what you do. Da, 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 da. And so in order to perform the exorcism adequately, I think you would still have to have some level of Latin comprehension. What we did in the text is we translated the first 4 exorcisms, and then we translated the introduction and then the litanies for the 5th exorcism. But what happens is the Italian exorcism is kind of like a greatest hits, and I'll get to it later. It follows the Latin version closely, but it takes all of the punishments that you've already given the demons and it kind of combines them together. And so the Italian one didn't really have anything new to contribute. So we translated the introduction, the litanies, and then, but not the rest of the exorcism because, well, we've got a lot of the Vulgate text there. And I think that a lot of publishers would be kind of, well, they would look askance at, publishing the entire Vulgate text of the Passion narrative in John twice. So, but, we point out different aspects of the Italian exorcism when they differ greatly, and they don't usually. The one point in the introduction which we do have is Alessandro Albertino is very skeptical of doctors. He doesn't like doctors very much, and he says, if there's a problem, go see a priest. And he tells at the beginning, you're a physician of souls as an exorcist, but don't go see an actual medical physician because you can't really trust them. And so he says negative things about them in the Latin introduction. In the Italian introduction, he has a quick story where he says he knows somebody who was sick who went to see a doctor, and he was given some tonic to take, and he took it and he died. So he says, well, you probably should have seen The Exorcist, because you just can't trust those medical doctors. This is the table of contents for the work. So we have the author's prologue where he dedicates the book to his bishop and then talks about his introduction and his style. And he's, going to use the words and instruments used against Christ, against the demons. Then we have the epigrams, the litany, then the exorcism in Matthew. The second one is on Mark. And again, the same format. We've got the litanies, the exorcism, or the litanies, then the epigrams, and then the exorcism. So too with Luke, and then with John. And then what's interesting is at the end of the 4th exorcism is you have different blessings. You've got different blessings, both for the entire body. It's interesting that kind of, if I've neglected to mention, any part of the body, let's go ahead and do another blessing to make sure that we've got the demons out of all of them. And then there's blessings on clothes. And he mentions the pacts in there. If anybody made a pact against your clothes or cursed them, and this is what you do. But this portion is, I just want to look at this briefly. But if you look, at the end of the John exorcism, he says what you need to do is you put your hand on the patient, and then the same way that let's look at the cat. Go down. Sorry about that. The same way that Christ was wounded with the crown of thorns in the head, make sure that I don't have any demons in my head. The same way that Christ's side was pierced with a spear, make sure that I don't have any demons in my side, and cleanse all of these areas. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, just as in your passion, the hairs of your head were shorn and plucked by the most heartless servants, so too may you vouchsafe, Lord Jesus Christ, to expel all demons with all their works from the hairs of your creature and Lord Jesus Christ. Just as you endured a crown of thorns upon your head, so too may you vouchsafe to expel all demons from the works of the head of your creature, from its brain, from the folds of its brain. Just as you wanted to hear with your ears, crucify him, so too may you vouchsafe to expel all demons with all their works of sorcery from the ears of your creature. Just as the stench of sin arose to your nose, so too may you vouchsafe to expel all demons and all their works from the nose of your creature. And this goes through all the body parts, so we don't need to go through all of this. But then after, at the end, before you get to the vernacular exorcism, you've got the blessing to be made on linens and other linen items. So you exercise all of them. And then you've got a prayer, and then a blessing without distinction on clothes. And then, if you think that your clothes might be cursed, what you need to do is wash them, cleanse them, let the water, the first washing, be thrown out in a proper place, and then wash them in a custom manner to make sure that there's nothing bad left in them. So really, interesting types of blessings and rituals, which gives, I suppose you could look at lots of different levels, but an idea that there is some spirit that's possessed the item. Okay. Obviously, Alessandro's strategy, you want to get the demons out of there. So what do? Well, you've got this parallel structure. So the words that are used against Christ, the instruments that are used against Christ, used against the demons. But you threaten them. So you threaten them. You threaten pains, penalties, and punishments. And this is all throughout the Malleus daemonum. So you threaten them. You need to find out their names. And this is constant. You ask them their names. And remember, there's never one. There's always a bunch of them. And you want to know their names. And this is important because once you find out the names of the demons, it gives you a certain authority over them. And then once you have this authority, you can conjoin it with invocations to Christ, the saints, and the angels. And even in Menge's exorcisms, he uses the name of Christ. So the name of Christ to try to, scare the demons out or chase the demons out. But once you find out their names, and also Alessandro is really curious about which one is going to be the first to leave. So you need to find out all their names, but especially who's going to be the first one. And so you know their names, and then you can address them directly, and then plea for the intercession of the saints and angels. You also want to know how they got there. What are they doing in the body? How did they get there? So how and why did they come? There has to be a reason. And next, how did they enter the body? How did you get in here? So how and why did you come? How did you get in here? When are you going to leave? And he gets real precise sometimes. Exactly what time? Tell me, when are you going to leave? His other strategy is to complain to Satan. And I kind of like this. It makes me think of a little kid. I'm telling Satan, but the demons have escaped from hell. And so presumably Satan doesn't know about this. And so you need to tell him. So you tell Satan that he's escaped. And then you find out that there are lots of demons in hell, and many are mean. That is, they don't like other demons. So the demons that have possessed you or have obsessed you or have afflicted you or whatever they're doing to you, many other demons don't like those demons. So you get Satan to bring up your demon enemies, and they're going to come. And so Satan and the enemy demons are going to retrieve you, and they're going to punish you, and they're going to make sure that you never escape from hell again. So you need to let Satan know. And so oftentimes, you plead with Satan, please come here and get your demons. So get your demons and bring them back home. And there's a lot of interesting questions here. One issue that comes up repeatedly is the issue of free will, because he seems to indicate that these demons don't have free will. And what happens is, he talks about they rebelled against the creator. Okay, so they had free will at one point because they rebelled and they all ended up in hell. Now, somehow, some are able to escape and they're able to possess bodies. But once they're in the body, it's kind of as if they don't really know what to do, that they don't really have a plan except to, possess and obsess the body. And so it's your job to kind of convince them to get out because they really can't act by their own volition. You need to act upon them. So they don't seem to be able to do much voluntarily. They rebelled against God, but after this rebellion, he always says, because you are either unwilling or willing, da, da, da. So they don't have this ability to will. And so you kind of need to force the demons into action. So you need to move, and you get them to move by threatening them, by bringing up Satan, by threatening them with pains and punishments. And, once you know their names, by calling them out by name. And there's some interesting features in here too. I'm not going to mention all of them, but I'm going to mention some. One of these is interesting is not only do you ask God to intervene, but you cite God by calling him by all of his names. And so he says, I order you to the depths of hell. And he says this repeatedly. And so that you always remain afar from the Christian faithful. Look and consider your downfall. And you and Lucifer with his followers look both at Mary Magdalene and the mother of our Lord Jesus Christ, and their followers who now dwell in heaven before the throne of God, for which place all of you were expelled, and to which you will never return. Nor will you be able to return to oppress this creature of God, nor bring any trouble to it. But in the virtue of all these names of God, and then we have a whole listing, Hell, Hello, Sattler, Emmanuel, so da 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 da. And this actually is kind of standard fare in exorcism manuals. So you've got all these names of God, and where do they come from? Well, I mean, you can probably tell by the names that they're a hodgepodge of all these different things, and really they're a mix of Hebrew and Greek. And this is an example where the Jewish grimoires come in, because this is kind of standard fare in a lot of the Hebrew tradition, where you invoke all the names of God from the Kabbalistic tradition. And so it's pretty clear here that Alberto didn't know the Greek and Hebrew, because he messes up all the names. That's not unique to him. Knowledge of Hebrew would have been very, very rare at the period. Knowledge of Greek would have been a little bit more common, but still, in something like this, a parish priest writing an exorcism manual, you'd expect a level of proficiency in Latin, and that's probably about it as far as languages go. So a lot of the incorrect spellings are from the unfamiliarity with the Greek and Hebrew. And so he probably trained as a priest, as an apprenticeship, and that's usually how it was done in the medieval and early modern period before the creation of the Jesuit order and seminaries. And so you've got this kind of patchwork of things, and these names of God appear in these other grimoires, which I mentioned. We've got Honorius, the Key of Solomon, Heptameron, Grimorium Virum, and so most of these are late medieval. In Renaissance, the problem is, again, that a lot of these materials aren't really codified until the Renaissance and even post-Renaissance period, although they claim to come from Solomon, and all the grimoire of Honorius is supposed to come from Pope Honorius in the 13th century, which is very unlikely that he wrote an exorcism manual. So there's an older tradition, whether it be oral or written, I don't know, but there's an oral tradition that has all of these exorcism manuals or exorcism formulae, which circulate for a while before they're codified. But the names of God appear frequently in these. They're in Mengi all over the place. So you cite the names of God because that gives you more power. You have all of these names that you can use. The binding to a fingernail, which I thought was interesting, and this does come from the Hebrew tradition. Although I started this independent study, I should say, with a student, as it turns out, her husband was doing a master's of theology at Notre Dame in New Orleans. And he was specializing he wrote a long paper. It's like a thesis, but he wrote a long paper in Hebrew demonology. And so he has very good Hebrew, and he's very interested in the Hebrew tradition. And this struck me as odd, is that what do you do with demons? And what Alessandro says, just as our Lord Jesus Christ was bound in the garden, so too here, bind you by the merits and suffering of Christ to this small fingernail. So you put the demon in the fingernail. I thought that's bizarre, but it's a Hebrew form of quarantine. It comes from the Hebrew tradition where you put things in the fingernail. And then so continuing, as since he was bound to a column of cords and chains and was flogged, I bind you to the same aforesaid place, and you've departed. I flog you with cords and a whip subject to Christ, and by the merits of the suffering, by the power of these words, I bind you for the last time. So, but the idea of quarantining to a fingernail was something I didn't expect. And so when I first translated it, I thought, wow, that's really unusual. The law of hell, he mentions this in John, and I thought this was interesting. Pilate therefore said to them, take you and judge him according to your law. And I say to Lucifer and all of your enemies to take you all according to the law of hell, namely the will of God, and let them cast you down and torture you. And this law of hell, what it means, it's according to the will of God, that somehow everything's disrupted because the demons are out of hell, and this isn't what God wants. God wants the demons to go back to hell. So Lucifer is called in this instance. I say to Lucifer and all of your enemies to come up and to get the demons, to restore the balance. So you need this perfect balance where the demons are back in hell, and they belong there by nature. Okay, the pact. This only comes up a couple times in the Malleus daemonum, and actually not until the end. It's in John, and then it's in the exorcisms to purify the linens. But John, in John, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. And I say to you, it's not lawful for you to disturb or oppress this creature of God in any way and by any pact. And then again, there's this idea that somehow you've either voluntarily or unwillingly made a pact with a demon or demons, and that there's, you know, this exchange, and so somehow you've fallen into this agreement. But this was a very common idea in the early modern period, that, you know, you make a pact with witches or demons or something. The final exorcism, the fifth exorcism, is the vernacular one. And again, it treats the Passion narrative in John. But as I said, it's kind of a greatest hits because it doesn't repeat in Italian the Latin material verbatim. As I said, it's kind of a greatest hits where you take, you know, kind of everything that you've mentioned in the 4 Latin ones, and, well, at least a lot of things, not everything, but then you translate it to Italian. So it begins, you've got a prayer, a letter to the oppressed, which is similar to the Latin introduction, but it's even more hostile to doctors, which I already told you. It says, don't go see a doctor. They'll give you a potion and you'll die. Then there are the litanies in the Italian version, the vernacular one, differ because they're the litanies of Mary Ever Virgin. They're Mary of Loreto. And so these litanies had been approved by the Franciscan Pope, Sixtus V, in 1587. And then at that time, all of the other Marian litanies were suppressed, at least for public use. So these were the, you know, the ones that were approved. And then we have a prayer, and then the Italian exorcism. So you've got the Vulgate text of John repeated in Latin with an Italian, you know, gloss or explanation, or, you know, take those whips and take those words and do that and get out, demons. So we really have a repeat of what we've seen. Well, why is this important, and what's the purpose of it? Well, what we've done is we've taken a lot of material we've made available in English with a pretty good introduction, a significant body of Latin material. And so this is something, I think, which is user-friendly. I think it's something which probably could be used in a 102 course or even in an early modern survey, looking at, you know, the role of exorcism in the early modern period. What we've also done is we made it easier to place Alessandro's work within a larger body of knowledge. Also, Alessandro is not mentioned a whole lot by secondary authors, but again, the fact that he's got a vernacular exorcism is mentioned. Secondly, the fact that he is so close to Scripture, which of course would be the wellspring of evangelical truth, right? So he sticks very, very close to Scripture. He's also mentioned in another source as wanting peace amongst Christian kings and princes. And I find this kind of interesting because this is in one of the litanies or invocations, you know, and he's asking God, oh, that you may bring peace to all princes and kings and let demons not oppress them. So, you know, but so it's a source that's not mentioned a whole lot, but it does play a role in this whole, you know, exorcism, Franciscan exorcism craze of the late 16th and early 17th century. The work itself is not academic. What's interesting about it is that it's not scholastic at all. You don't have these definitions. This is what a demon is. This is how he got here. This is how you expel him. And so really it's kind of a strange mix of high and low. He has the names of God, which he got from somewhere, and he's got enough other things that he looked at other exorcism manuals to get material, but a lot of what he's done he's come up with on his own. So I think overall, I would call it a kind of low level of popular religion. And it really makes us wonder about to whom he administered. And I, suspect that a lot of these people probably were people who had mental illness or, something wrong with them. And that, they're assumed to be possessed. And so he's using this exorcism to try to expel what he assumes are demons. Another big question is the poetry. And the poetry, where did it come from? Well, I have no idea. And so that's something which will be left for later people to try to figure out. What I think personally is that he explained to somebody who was a humanist in training what he was doing and said, hey, can you give me this neat introduction? Can you write poetry? And so even with the poetry, once I translated it, I realized that there's problems with it, that not all of it actually rhymed. It's Matthew, Mark, Luke. There's one in Luke where you've got long, short, long, long. And so I asked somebody to take a look, and I said, "What this is this?" And actually, there is an error. So it's not me. So there is an error. So whoever composed the poems doesn't get the meter down perfectly. So that's why I think it's probably somebody younger and somebody who's learning Latin poetry. So it's in the Elegiac formats and Ovid, it's like Adullus and it's Propertius. It's in a lot of the Latin poets. So it's nothing new, but it's a revival of a classical form. Another thing is the question of the role of the Franciscans. Why are they so involved in the production of exorcism manuals? Is it because of Pope Sextus V? But it is in the golden age of Franciscan manuals, exorcism manuals, is the late 16th, early 17th century. So we have a plethora of all of these manuals. And so here's another indication of one that's very unique, but is part of this genre nevertheless. And so there's no real dense theological matter in there. It's easy to read, it's accessible. So I think it's something that I would think would be useful in either an honors Western Civ 102 class or a course on the Renaissance and Reformation period. And I think that is just about all I have to say. So I will go ahead and stop talking now. And if you have any questions, I would be willing to address them. Do we have any?
Emma, we had a raised hand earlier. I don't know if that person is still here with us. Someone wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I did see that. If you have a question, you can go ahead and speak up or use the little raise hand function because we have a lot of people here.
Yeah.
I apologize. When I pulled up the PowerPoint, I couldn't see any people, so I couldn't see a raised hand.
Okay.
So
It's okay. I meant to say, I forgot to say at the beginning that we were going to hold questions for the end anyway.
Okay.
Well, I have a question to kick it off. And that is, it sounds like some of these rituals that he's talking about and writing down are part of the current modern day rituals of exorcism. To what extent is there a crossover? Are they still being practiced? Are they still part of the current?
Yeah, what I mentioned when he identifies the 4 levels of possession, affliction, and all that, that today there's 3, which the church recognizes. And so I have them on the PowerPoint, but they're either, that you've committed some sin, you've done that, but one is demonic possession. So there's still the possibility of demonic possession. Now, I haven't read lots of the modern literature, but both Diana and Wes, with whom, I worked, Diana, with whom she took the independent study with me, and her husband Wes, they've read a lot of the modern stuff. And so there's all kinds of testimonials of priests who perform exorcisms and what they say. And generally, most of them say 99% of the time it's this or that, but that 1% of the time I was really scared,
I'd be pretty scared too.
Yeah.
I got a quick question too. Obviously, it kind of goes unsaid that exorcisms are religiously motivated, but are there any other motivations that are really driving, especially the Franciscans, like economic or political or social, that are really pushing these exorcisms? If that makes sense.
Well, I kind of wonder when Sixtus the Fifth issues this declaration. We need to be more concerned about these things. This is the same time where this is okay. The Council of Trent, and so we're thinking, how are we going to combat Protestantism? And so, is it possible that a lapse into Protestantism could be seen as the work of a demonic being or beings, right? So, what other types of things are going on? Well, I mean, these have been going on historically, and I think in the medieval period, remember, you don't have access to psychiatrists or psychologists. And so I think that there's lots of issues, and these issues manifest themselves in various ways. And the solution would have been to, send, bring in the exorcist to see what they can do. So I think some of it has to do with mental illness. The timing is important, though, I think. And so the impetus to create these new manuals and to think about sorcery and all that, I think stems, at least to some degree, from the Catholic reaction to Protestants. And so, they think this is going on. Well, obviously they think this is going on because they're, possessed by these spirits, and they're trying to find some way to hinder the church. Conversely, though, when the Roman ritual in 1614 comes out, one of the reasons that these exorcism rituals were standardized is kind of the assumption that they were bringing the church into ignominy, that there were so many different types of exorcism rituals, that we're fighting with the demons, but in our conflict with the Protestants, it's making us look a little bit embarrassing. But I think, initially the impetus was just, in addition to the standard mental health issues and other things, the role of Protestants and the number of areas that had been won over for Protestantism.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'd like to hear some more about what you make of all of the references to Jupiter and Saturn and all that sort of stuff. What do you think's going on there?
I think somebody's having fun. Now, the reason Diana got all excited about it at first is she has this idea that maybe there's possible enduring or lingering paganism that continued from the classical period to the Renaissance. And I don't know. I don't agree. But every time she'd see a Jupiter or Saturn, that's it. There's classical paganism that survives. And I don't necessarily agree with her, but it made me think of a story. I have a friend from Vicenza in Italy, and when he grew up, there was a little forest nearby, which the old timer said, it's haunted, it's possessed, don't go there. And as it turns out that they excavated an ancient temple to Diana there. So, I mean, it was this idea, there had been a pagan temple there, and it ended up in modern parlance as being haunted or demonic. And so even here, whoever wrote those epigrams treats the classical gods and goddesses as if they were demons, And so what I think is that there's somebody who has a classical education, and usually a pretty good classical education, is having fun because, as I said, these are complicated. It took me a while, and when Diana first showed it to me, I thought, well, I don't want to do this. But it was only, I mean, they're short poems. The first ones are kind of long, and they got shorter. But the first one is extremely complicated. And like I said, it's because the fact that the third one doesn't scan, it tells me that it's somebody who wasn't real adept. It's somebody who, was practicing but hadn't quite perfected the genre of writing Latin poetry. So, like I said, I think it's somebody who's having fun. I think Alessandro mentioned to somebody, maybe in confession, maybe at mass, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do this, and da-da-da-da-da. And if his exorcism were so popular and he had all these fans because he chased out their demons, as it were, right? Maybe somebody said, hey, I can help you out, and I can go ahead and do this. And I'm, willing to give you these great, Latin introductions to your exorcisms. So, I mean, that's what I think. I don't know. We looked around, and the Corpus Christianorum's got a search base, and so I did look around, and I searched to try to find, and I can't find anything. So, there's nothing from the medieval period that looks like that. So, I don't know. I don't think they're anything that circulated widely, though. I imagine that they were, whoever invented them for, the use of Alessandro and his hammer against demons.
Thanks.
Okay, is that all right?
Zachary Poche has a raised hand.
Yeah, hey, I don't have a question. I just wanted to let y'all know I have to head out, but I wanted to say thank you for giving this lecture. I really did enjoy it. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
All right, y'all have a nice day.
You too. Thank you very much. That was nice.
That was very nice. Does anyone else have any questions? I think we might be in the clear. Thank you so much, Dr. Traver, for volunteering to give our first lecture. That was a really good, really strong start for our semester. I really enjoyed every minute of that. Dr. Cavell, can you think of anything else needs to be said?
Oh, thanks for everyone for coming, and Drew, thank you. That was really fascinating. I actually have a bunch of questions, but I'm not going to keep everyone. I'll come find you.
Okay,
And,
that's fine.
yeah. Thank you so much.
All right,
Alrighty, guys.
And we want to plug our next one, Emma.
Yes.
Dr. Gonzalez Perez here.
Yes. Our next meeting is going to be on, I think it was March the 3rd, or was it the 2nd? Whichever. Second. Yeah, 2nd. Whichever one's the Tuesday. March the 2nd. Dr. Gonzalez Perez is going to be talking with us. So it's going to be another really good lecture. And same deal. If you want to join us for that lecture, it's the exact same link. So just save this link, and we will be here. I will be here at 4:45, waiting to see everyone trickle in. Really big turnout for this one. I'm kind of astounded. Dr. Perez emailed me and she said, "I can't get in. Did y'all hit the limit?" I was like, "Yeah."
People get excited about demons.
Apparently, yeah. No, I think it was, the topic definitely attracted people that normally wouldn't come join us. But
it's a good problem to have.
There she is. Hey, Dr. Perez.
I'm here. It's a good problem to have, you guys.
Yeah, no, I'm upset that a couple people might not have been able to tune in, but I can't believe so many people showed up. That's something that would never happen in person for sure.
Exactly.
So
Can you send out the recording, Drew? I'm so sorry, I missed the beginning because of the max occupancy. But Emma, can you send out the link for us to be able to watch the whole thing?
Yes, absolutely. I recorded it from the very beginning, and I'll get all the professors who have students that are here for extra credit. We'll have to sift through quite a lot of people, but we will be getting that list to you guys too.
Thank you, guys.
Great.
Absolutely. So let's see.
All right. Have a good evening, and thank you for letting me present.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Anytime.
So much. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yes.
Wow, Emma.
I'm astounded. Was that all your students?
There was a bunch that had exams this week. I think of a lot of folks. So everyone's desperate for the extra credit too.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, exorcism is a good topic.
It really is.
I don't think we maxed out though. I think you can have up to 250 people on a Google.
Apparently, I asked Chris while we were doing this.
Okay.
Professors can have up to 250 people. Students can have 100. So since this was set up on my account, 100's the limit.
Interesting.
Which is unfortunate.
Well, it's not usually a problem we have to face, but
yeah, I hope it doesn't happen again. But at the same time, we had 70 people who were on time.
Right.
Everyone else came in late.
Right.
So hopefully it's not a problem that keeps happening.
Right. Awesome.
Like Dr. Perez said, is a good problem to have.
Exactly. And you should get a separate document from Google Meet that tells you who attended and for how long.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. And so it might actually be easier. Well, it might be easy to use that as a Excel template and then build off of who they belong to.
That's a good plan.
Courses from that. But it usually comes separately from the email notification of the recording and